let's say a company has missed out on that first phase, that first card mitigation phase. A union is campaigning now inside their company. We've lost the chance to set up that preventative wall around the company. What can a company do now via their frontline supervisors to win that campaign against the union?
Well, James, unfortunately, game on. Game on, James. They are past that process of card mitigation, and now they have received formal notice from the National Labor Relations Board that a petition has been filed involving their employees and that a election will be conducted. Game on. At that point, we instruct many companies that literally you need to stay focused without tunnel vision of what you think were the issues that developed to get you here to where the petition has been filed. You need to win that campaign. And clearly the role of the supervisor has to come in play. They must be educated to understand the time sensitivity involved in managing a campaign and how they too must be on board to maintain that effective communication to those voting.
Yeah, and the problem with once the process and the game is on, Dan, the harder it is to establish that, because and the campaign and the frustration may have been built, and it may even not even be accurate, but the perception of unfairness, the perception of favoritism is the same. It's reality. But the longer it goes before management starts to engage with employees, the harder it is to do it. The first thing when I was on the other side, the first thing that the union's in there to destroy the relationship, because nobody joins a union, nobody votes for a union when it comes time for the election with a company that they enjoy, with management that they have a good relationship and a good communication with. So when a petition is filed, the first thing management tells their supervisors to do. What's the first thing that they tell the supervisors to do, Dan? Go out and communicate. Go out and talk to them.
Right.
Go out and talk to them. Well, by this time, the union's already, face it, nobody's reinventing the wheel. The union went out there and said, this is what the company's going to do. They're going to try to start being best friends with you. They're going to try to start talking to you. But what happened to them the last year? They haven't been doing it. So in other words, it's playing right into the union's hand. That's why it's so much harder to deal with after the petition has been filed.
But James, if I could follow up on what Rick is saying, there too, the supervisor winds up becoming a punching bag. Because now all of a sudden the management is like, oh, wait a minute, they're putting on their armor, they're getting their swords, they're getting their shields, they're there for the fight. And they're telling the first line supervisor, come on, now you have to take guard now. Now we have to take a defensive position because the union is being offensive against us. They have filed a petition, they're attacking, we must defend ourselves. And the supervisor is the one standing there as the first line of attack against them now to try to blunt that attack. And they feel that. Believe me, we have all too often the supervisors coming back up to us saying, time out. I am tired of getting slapped in the face and taking the punches for you. Where are you in supporting of me now?
Right. Sure, I think one of the most important things there, and something we might not have touched on already, is that these employees have been told, by their management and by their supervisors to approach those frontline supervisors first with any questions they have about their workplace. And if a supervisor is not educated about the union, not educated about union politics and labor relations politics and all these processes that come into play, they're not going to have the right answers for their employees, and who's going to be there with the answers but a union representative?
James, and that's why the first thing we do when there's a petition is that we have to wash the slate clean. We have to get those supervisors educated. During an organizing campaign, it's like a gun's pointed at you and the trigger is pulled. You have to dodge that bullet. You have to get through that election. So you have to be able to utilize the best supervisors, the best communicators, and utilize them to go out and consistently pass out that message.
Yeah, and the executive leadership, a lot of times, James, by the time that we're engaged once the petition is filed and we're talking to the executive leadership about the situation to assess what our first steps are going to be, a lot of times they point the finger back to the first line supervisor to say, well, ultimately, obviously, they must have failed. Because this wouldn't have happened if they would have maintained appropriate communication. Obviously, they failed. Look, that's what worse can you do except to put them into the ground and bury them. You need to lift them up and bring them back to the surface to know that you do have their support because you need them with that armor on.
Like, and 90% of the time when we get a call that there's a petition, the first question I will ask is, were you surprised that there's organizing activity? And 90% of the time, the answer is yes, we're surprised. When we go and start talking to the supervisors, and many times we said, well, we had no idea. But a week or two into the campaign, after they've been educated, it's always, now that I think about it, this issue came up. Now that I think about it, this wasn't quite strange. But we never put two and two together. We never thought about it. And once again, that is why it's so important to have supervisors, management, trained ahead of the curve before the lion's at the door.
So so let's say past the campaigning process, what would a supervisor do in a situation like a strike?
Well, the strike, wow. There's only so many things that could happen if the union wins the right of representation. They could reach a contract, an impasse could be reached, or a strike. No one likes to hear of strikes, James. That word sends shivers up my back, as well as probably every employer out there. And the supervisor is stuck in the middle of it. Because obviously if the employees walk out, more times than not, the supervisor now is carrying a double and triple duty. Because someone has to fulfill that role on the line. Someone has to take over that nursing position. Someone else has to pick up the mop on the floor. And a lot of times the supervisor's now to take on more tasks. Again, how does that make them feel? Do they really feel that they are being supported for their actions and their contribution to the company as part of leadership? Or they now just feel like they're being prostituted?
I was a strike director also. And I've worked on many strikes across the country. And some pretty violent ones. The last strike that I worked on was the Detroit newspaper strike here in Detroit, Michigan. And that from the time they went on strike to the time they got a contract was almost 7 years. And that's the once again, it's going back to preventing these things from going on, because once there's a strike, it is scorched earth policy. The supervisors, because they have to, the supervisors have to anticipate that the workers might be coming back if there's a settlement to the strike. Whether there's permanent replacement workers in there that take the jobs or temporary replacement workers. But if there's a settlement, then at some point in time, some of these workers might be coming back. So how do they communicate with the workers? At that point in time, it's scorched earth policy. The supervisors are the enemy. There is a hatred, there is a mistrust that may never be healed. It may never be healed because the supervisors had to go across the line, and their responsibility is to do whatever it takes to keep their company operating and moving forward. And once again, the hatred and the anger and the distrust is so strong that there may never be once again a regular relationship. And I've seen families who one brother was a supervisor and the other brother was out on the strike line and they stopped talking. I see the husbands and wives who were in that same position break up and separate and divorce. I mean, the destructive nature of a strike is so complex, and so it takes over everything.
So what it seems like is that a supervisor to the employee and even to the union to some degree gets lumped in with the company. They become part of the company. Which, during a union campaign, what a union's trying to do is promote that dichotomy, that diatribe against the company. So I feel like what a company really has to do then for its frontline supervisors is to show that support, to not throw them under the bus, to express that support. And I think one of the most effective ways they could do that is provide proper training so they can handle things like this and not see, as you said, Dan, before, not be seen by themselves as prostitutes.
Right. And, really, God willing, they win the campaign. As Rick is talking about the destructive nature that a campaign can endure on a company as a final result, post-campaign and the activities that are promoted post-campaign, seriously, you have to make sure that you're engaging back with your employees. As much of those non-monetary values that employees appreciate, respect, dignity, fairness, that has to start with the leadership too. They have to feel that they too are treated equally and fair, and that there's not a biasness just because they're part of leadership. So as long as we maintain that good nature with our supervisors, and you have to focus on that, they will disseminate that information onward.
Dan, one of the things when I was an organizing director, and one of the things that we used to say is that we only have to win once, and the company has to win every time. And so many times there's a campaign, the company wins, and they go back to business as usual. And every time the union has an election, and they can have it once a year, so every time they have an election, the percentage of their win ratio goes up if management does not change, how they communicate with their employees. So even if you win, you have a divided workforce. Just because you won the election doesn't mean everybody holds hands and sings Kumbaya. It doesn't happen like that. You have to address and re-bridge that gap that caused the problem in the first place, or it's going to repeat itself.
Okay, so let's say then we're talking about if a company has won this union campaign. What about on the flip side of that coin? What is the role of a supervisor in a unionized environment? What is a unionized supervisor, or a supervisor in a company with a union present? What is that role?
Well, James, there's two schools of thought that we look at in a unionized versus non-unionized environment. One of them is to do things right, and then we look at the counter of that as to do the right thing. And in a unionized environment, there are restrictions. You have now a union contract, a collective bargaining agreement that specifically spells out how the employees will be treated according to their hours, their work conditions, wages, and compensation. Everything is black and white. There is no gray. There is no middle ground. It is all spelled out. And literally, the union, they look at the role of the supervisor as a robot then. If there's a question or concern about discipline or compensation or anything at all, what's the book say? Do things right according to the book. Then you have a negative aspect to that, where in a unionized environment, unionization has a negative impact to the flexibility, the ability to do the right thing. The flexibility is so important. And clearly, the supervisor has to make sure that they understand the essence of why the flexibility is needed.
One of the issues that we have during organizing campaigns, and why we have to really look at a lot of the frontline supervisors. How does a union get frontline supervisors to support their organizing campaign? And one of the things is exactly what you were just talking about, Dan. If the union comes in here, because if you're working at a warehouse or you're working at a hospital, say for instance a warehouse, and if you're short-handed, what does a supervisor have to do, Dan? They have to hop on that high-low, they have to drive it, they have to move it, they have to do the work. So in a unionized shop, and we're not looking at the flip side of that coin, but in a unionized shop, they're going to say, you know what, life's going to be better for me. Because all I have to do is give orders. The physical aspect of the job will be much easier for me. Also, guess what? If the union is able to increase their wages and benefits, I'm going to get better too. And that's what we used to tell them. If we get better benefits, if we get better raises, they're going to have to make yours better also, to keep the incentive of being a supervisor. And there's other issues also. A lot of times you go into a lot of places, small towns, where there's a facility where the people are hired from that vicinity, And a lot of times, the people who are the supervisors, and that's why it's so important to know who your supervisors are, grew up with a lot of these people that are working for you. You played softball together. You grew up. So where is their loyalty? Is it going to be to the company, or is it going to be to somebody who used to have sleepovers with you and vacations with you when you were a kid? More than likely it's going to be your lifelong friends that you're going to have the dedication to. So that's, once again, training is everything. Really understanding who the people you put in those positions as supervisors are also.
James, once again, let me expand on Rick's point, because the unions know. The unions know darn well that if they win and they're in, they understand how the management and the first line supervisor and the employees involved, now the union members, become immune to the pain, because it becomes routine now. We've had clientele that we have worked with through a process, and during the struggle, that controversy of whether it's card mitigation and they're signing authorization cards, there's leafleting, the company is involved in an actual campaign with an NLRB petition, and there's a upcoming election, that has so much stress and anxiety to it. Everyone is affected directly by it. The first line supervisors are completely in disarray sometimes, because they're literally pulling their hair out, because they don't know. It's such a direction coming from everywhere. There's communication coming from both sides. And the union knows completely well that once they're in, the next supervisor becomes accustomed to the routine, and they are immune to that pain.
Yeah, and in the organizing process also, the first thing when the union comes in is they're going to dissect that whole facility. They're going to get a war room and who are your friends, who do you know, who do you like, who you don't like. They're going to dissect the employees and the frontline supervisors to know everything about them, to know if they have weaknesses, or to know the strengths, so they can try to utilize those relationships to promote the organizing campaign.
So once again, and as always, I want to bring it back to what have we learned, and what can companies do to train their supervisors to be an effective, exactly that, a frontline supervisor? What can they do to be the first line of that company's defense, and to also make themselves accessible in a way that the employees will approach a supervisor with a problem instead of turning towards a union?
But James, I'll start off by saying my advice to any member of executive leadership is to honestly attempt to gain an appreciation, a true, sincere appreciation to the value of the first-line supervisor in general. To understand their role, as we have explained it, and to understand the influence and the impact that the supervisor can have long-term to their labor relations position, as well as in maintaining a positive employee relations environment. So saying that, I look at it this way. And as far as the supervisor is concerned, the union will take complete advantage of that person and their lack of intelligence, or perhaps their ignorance on the issues.
Sure.
And they will exasperate the situation, and they will be able to spoon feed the supervisor in order to try to gain their trust as well, get them to drink the Kool-Aid and support the drive, and all of a sudden now you have a rogue on the side of leadership coming across.
And also, I think that it's important to recognize and to understand that putting the resources into management training is a tangible endeavor. And that's why a lot of times management does not put the effort and the resources into training management, because they feel that it's not tangible for them to do so. And it's a misconception, and the training, nothing can be more important as far as, so many things that you can't even calculate how it costs you. You're talking about, employee turnover rate, you're talking about productivity, you're talking about all kinds of things. If you have to have an organizing campaign, once a union sets its targets on you, the amount that it's going to cost your company in human communications, as far as money goes also, is just enormous. It can destroy a company, it can hurt a company, and it can destroy lives.
And this training, James, is not a one-shot deal. we've talked to many clients who are facing the reality of witnessing a true campaign, whether they have a petition or they're in card mitigation. And what is it we hear all the time? Oh, we never saw this coming. Well, why would you think that you were immune to this? Well, we did some training with our management 10 years ago. I don't care if you did it 3 years ago. This is a necessary component that should be in your annual review every year for your management, for every level of your leadership, to make sure that they are well versed and abreast to the current environment of labor relations, and always keep that awareness intact so that they can read and identify the signs and symptoms of unionization.
And Dan, I think you'll agree with me that all too many times we are used as corporate firemen. Firefighters, when the flames getting hot, that's when they call us, instead of preparing themselves before so there is no fire. We get called, there's an emergency coming out now, we have problems, we have to go out and try to put out the fire. But the company that's really thinking ahead is a company that's going to say, well, let's insulate our company against these fires, first of all. So it too many times we're used as an emergency device and not as maintaining their positive management
The
relations.
preventative.
Sure.
Right.
Don't buy fire insurance. Just don't leave the stove on. All right, guys. Thanks a lot for the conversation today. I think we touched on some valuable subjects. Dan, it was a pleasure having you. It was nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Rick, always a pleasure. And we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.